I'm Tim Lawrence. I'm with LHPH Capital, and I wanted to start off with a couple things first. One is, if you want to get this presentation on your phone or your computer, follow along. I guess you can't do it on your computer. On your phone, and text 77513, the word alternative. That same text stream that's been coming to your phone all day, every hour, on the hour. Word alternative. Next, I wanted to start out with a brief survey. Usually when I'm in the audience and a survey is about to happen, I raise my hand about 3 times halfway, unsure of what the questions are going to be. How many of you are currently offering a Lease Pay Here program yourselves? You have one? Okay. How many of you have been thinking about it? You're on the fence. You're not sure if it's the right fit or not? Okay. And how many of you saw these 4 letters on the agenda and said, well, I don't know what that is. I didn't know it was a thing, so I'm going to come by and see it. All right. Appreciate your transparency. So here's the things I wanted to cover today, and my hope is that we'll be able to have 2 or 3 key takeaways that you can go home if you already have a program, if you're on the fence, or if you didn't really know what it was. There are so many different industry pains that come up in these conferences. 20, 30, we could list them out on a whiteboard and all feel really good that, yeah, those are painful. We hear kind of these consistent top tier ones from the dealers that we work with. The first one, over and over again, is increased competition. And it's coming from every angle. And I'm sure we've already talked about it in some of these other meetings that we weren't able to attend to. But we know that in 2009, that the US produced the least amount of auto units in 2 decades. And what that means on the supply side is that as you're reaching back for those year vehicles now, there's a lower supply. And so the value of those vehicles for the dollars you're paying for is going to be inflated on the dollar side compared to the value. And so the further you get away from this trough right here, the more value you're going to get for the vehicles. The second part of the competition is the lenders reaching down and the franchise dealers starting to reach down into the deep subprime and subprime. And we know we've all experienced that if you're a dealer to some degree in your portfolio, in your business. Some of the ones we don't think about all the time are technology. Because of the hyper interconnectedness of technology right now, your potential customer may find that they have more opportunities than they thought they did a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because they can Google it and look for it on their phone and find out, oh, I actually qualify for something else. And you're losing customers before they actually end up in your store. Here's some other ones. I'm not going to touch on all of them, but the sales tax is a pretty big one. If you're paying your sales tax up front in your state, there are 30 states in the US that are pay-as-you-go states. And as my senior partner, George Klinke, who's been doing leasing and financing for 40 years, likes to say, there's 30 states in the US that are great for leasing, and there's 20 states that are good. What that sales tax means is that you're only paying sales tax on the payment or monies collected and not paying it all up front, trying to retrieve it or get credits back later. As a lender and as our owner and senior partners have extensive leasing experience, they believe that it's a really good fit here in this space for a multitude of reasons, but because it has a lot of benefits for each party in the transaction. On the customer side, and I'll get into this later, but you can offer them more car for their payment. Of course, it's going to assist in credit rebuilding if you're reporting to bureaus, just like in Buy Here, Pay Here. The sales tax only on payments that we just spoke about. There's termination flexibility, and I'll talk in just a couple slides more about what that could look like. From the dealer side, it's typically a shorter term, 36, 32, 24 months. And what that means immediately is that it's less risk to you. Because you're the owner of the vehicle, you get to depreciate the asset over time on your books. You're also able to retrieve that vehicle with more ease depending on the state you're in because you're the owner on the title, not the first lien holder. You also get that sales tax advantage because when you're financing the vehicle on day one, all that money is not going to the state. You can use that towards your down payment of actual to your operation costs, your commissions, and every other part of your business. There's a higher likelihood of customer retention because at the end of the lease term, your customer is going to have a face-to-face interaction with you. So you get to engage them and potentially create the next sale. And then there's competitive differentiation for a lot of these reasons, and then some that are to come in some other slides. The financials can be a lot simpler because the money that you're collecting looks more like a cash basis. So when you're looking at your financials, you can define your profitability on a month-to-month basis so much more clearly. On the lender side, we like the collateral control. We like that you own the vehicle because it gives us peace of mind that you're going to have a higher likelihood of retrieving that vehicle that we just helped you finance. Not always, but in many cases, you can offer better collateral, and because you can, you often do. Right now, it's a niche market that's growing, and I'll get into the numbers in a little bit. And we are not always that bright from a lender's perspective, and so we like to see the simpler financials too. One of the confusing things about leasing is there's this different language, and so it seems unknown. The Regulation M is what defines leasing language and disclosures and rates, and Regulation Z is traditional financing for your automobile. They're sister regulations underneath the Truth in Lending Act. There's a lot of similarities in them, but there's different language. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but here's some examples of what the language is. If you're going to try to sneak out a little early today, you're going to be forced to answer this quiz on the way out. So here's a very high level or leasing for dummies view of how to understand a lease versus a loan. In a lease, there's always a residual. And if it's an operating lease, then the residual is probably going to be 20% or higher. So that means that the financing that your customer, your lessee, is going to have on the vehicle is going to be from the $10,000 down to the $2,000. And what that means is that they're paying principal from $8,000 or from $10,000 to $2,000, that's $8,000, but they're paying interest if you were to look at an amortization schedule of $10,000 down to $2,000. We can get into that math later if you want. You can grab me at the exhibit. On the loan side, it's $10,000 down to $2,000. This balloon side on your left is what gives you a lot of flexibility in creating your payment. If you like dogs, you appreciate that. If you like cats, you do not. So you can have early termination options in your leasing structure that can be reviewed by Hudson Cook, and you know that they're legitimate. You can collect a deposit from your customer, just like as if it's your house and you're renting it out to somebody. That deposit you can use as part of an early termination fee if they lose their job and they don't know what to do, and because the vehicle is yours, you want it back sooner than possible, as soon as possible. So you add in this early termination option, and the retrieval's easier. You get your vehicle back in better shape, and you might have a customer when they get their job again later. The payment is defined by the term and the implicit rate in the lease and the residual. Those are all levers that help you define what the structure is of your lease and the payment. And I'm going to go through some examples of low, mid, and high ACV options just so you can see how could I structure my lease program. You can or cannot have a purchase option depending on what you want in your program and what the disclosures are in your lease agreement. Why would you want a purchase option? Well, in your sales process, if your customer really wants to buy the car at the end, you have the purchase option that says, look, you're going to take a 24-month or 36-month test drive on this car to see if you really want it at the end. And if you do, you can buy it. Here's what it's going to cost you at the very end. Why wouldn't you want a purchase option? Maybe you have a little bit higher ACV vehicle and you're thinking about it differently as an asset for you, and you want that vehicle back so you can put it out on the street again. And then depending on how you structure your lease, it's either going to be a capital or an operating from an accounting and tax perspective. There are a lot of different strategies that you can deploy with your Lease Here, Pay Here program. I'm going to go through three, a low, mid, and higher ACV strategy so that you can see if it's the right fit for you. But what I want to do is use vehicles that are a little bit on the other side of that trough, so away from 2009 as far as I can be. So we'll use this. This is from MMR, base average. This 2012 Nissan Sentra has 100,000 miles on it. The ACV from auction, 3,100, and we'll put 900 into it for reconditioning, give or take. The sales price or agreed upon value of the vehicle, we'll use a common $9,000 for a $4,000 cost. As in your leasing program, you can have an acquisition fee. It costs you money as a dealer to get that vehicle, and now you're going to pass along part of that to your customer. This is completely legal. In almost every new lease across the country, you'll pay an acquisition fee. In the state of California, where I'm from, I have always paid an acquisition fee, and they assure me that every new lease has an acquisition fee. The most recent ones I paid for were $895. As long as it's consistent across the board in your program is what makes it compliant. So that acquisition fee gets added in to the value of the vehicle that you agreed upon. So now you're up to $995. The customer comes in with $500, which is a pretty common down payment. That brings it back down to $9, and you'll get a before tax payment of $317. And here's how you get it. We're going to use that 20% residual, so that's $1,800. Your rate in the lease is 25%, and we're just going to use 6% sales tax because it's not super high like California, and I think North Carolina is 6%. So we'll use that. So it gets you a $336 payment for the month for that vehicle, $78 a week. I know you're going to have some questions about this in a little bit. How am I going to pay for this with my lender? Is my payment spread going to be enough? But before we get there, let's step it up a notch. So we'll stick with 2012, but we're going to move into a Honda. This one has 80,000 miles on it, same base MMR average. This one was 5,200 ACV. We'll put 800 into it for reconditioning. And we'll say the agreed upon value or sales price is $10,000. Still super competitive. Acquisition fee is $500, so that brings it up to $10,500. Customer gives you $500, so now it's back down to $10,000, and this gets you a before tax payment of $351. Same model. So 20% residual, 25% rate in the lease. By the way, in a lease, in Regulation M, there's no maximum percentage rate because it's usually a money factor. As long as it's consistent across the board and you're not seeking to use a really high rate with one particular customer or customer group, then it's completely legitimate in how you structure your deal. And like I was talking about those levers, the residual, the interest rate, the term, those all affect your payment. So in this example, you get a $371 payment for this vehicle, $86 a week. What would it look like if we really ramped it up to a much higher ACV? This is where we start to move around some of those levers. So here, this is a 2015 Nissan Sentra, 40,000 miles on it, likely an off-lease or an off-rent vehicle. This is getting much further away from that trough where the supply is higher and you're getting a lot more value for the dollars you're putting in right at the beginning. You might look at the $11,000 agreed upon value and really scratch your head. How is that possible to do? And I guess if I could do that, I'd be pretty competitive in my market. For these higher ACVs, or for this program example, we'll use the California acquisition fee of $900 or $895. So we add that in. Customer, in this example, is going to put in $1,000 because we're going to collect a deposit too. $500 goes to the actual lease financing, and $500 is a deposit to you that you can hold and apply later to wear and tear, or a disposition fee, or an early termination, or a swap fee. And here's how it breaks down. But because this is a higher value vehicle, we're going to raise the residual up to 35%, because that car, when it comes back after 3 years, is going to have a lot more value to it. We wouldn't want it to be at 20% because it's going to be worth more than that. MMR would predict that it will be 4,000-ish, 4,500. So we can use that as an example. Same money factor, same sales tax. And look at this, $392 a month for this vehicle and $90 a week. We just put a 2015 vehicle out on the street for $90 a week. And the buy here, pay here average is 6,800 ACV. Is that what we said for this payment? Okay, well, let's do a little two-turn example. Let's say I did buy a higher ACV vehicle. Here's what the first cycle would look like, 36 months. So we already talked about putting $9,000 into the deal. I get $500 in cash. The acquisition fee is added to my stream of payments, and this is what I'm collecting. Then my gross profit is just under $5,000 after putting that money in. That's okay. That's not great for 3 years. But now you have the vehicle back. And let's say this driver put 50,000 miles on it because they were moonlighting at Lyft. You're not super pumped about it, but you still have a pretty good vehicle when it comes back. You got to put in a little bit of reconditioning, let's say $1,500, to get it street ready again. You get a deposit from your next customer, $500. You get your 24 payments of $335, but you already paid for the vehicle. So now your gross profit on this, we'll say you wanted to put it out for 2 years. The gross profit on this 2-year cycle is already higher than the last 3 year, $7,000. Even though it's a lower value vehicle now, but you also didn't fight at auction to get this vehicle. So now at the end of this 2 years, MMR would suggest it's probably worth $2,800, but you know it's probably going to be worth more like $2,000 after some auction fees and it going through the mud. But you add all these up for a 5-year program, and now your gross profit's just under $14,000. Okay, so let's debrief on what we just did. You paid off your car in your first turn because you're thinking about it a little bit differently in the long run. You want to get to that second turn. You had hopefully 2 satisfied customers who told their friends and family about the sweet deal that they got. That was a 2015 and 2012 vehicle. You were ultra competitive in your market because you priced your vehicle at $11,000. That was a 40,000 mile vehicle, 2015. You served 2 different types of customers for 2 different types of cars at 2 different payments. And pretty important, your service team got to know that vehicle. Maybe you had a service contract. If you did, then they're getting to know that vehicle and the issues that were coming along with that vehicle or not. They know how this one runs. And then, of course, and most importantly, you paid off the vehicle and had gross profit of just under $14,000. Well, what would that look like if you actually had a program that you were implementing? Here's an example. I like graphs that go up, by the way. Here's an example of a dealer putting 30 of these out a month, and I know there's always a lot of variables. We have a more advanced spreadsheet we can send you that you can play around with to say, you know, what would the cash flow model look like for me if I was paying X and doing this number of deals? But if you took this model and spread it out over 5 years, you see this sort of hinge that happens. And that hinge, where it starts to increase rapidly, is right when your first cycle of vehicles starts to come back paid off. Those first 30 that you put out come back paid off to you, and now you're getting, even though you're getting less payment for it, you're getting so much more gross profit in the deal because that payment stream is all yours now. You're not sharing it with your lender. And so what happens as those come back and your portfolio matures, your cash flow explodes. So it's a little bit different way of thinking. You're thinking about your business in the long run, not just what can I make in the next 20 months, 22 months before this deal falls apart. But there's a ton of similarities in a lease here, pay here, and buy here, pay here program. You still have a sales process to get that customer into the right vehicle for them. That's not different. You're still financing the vehicle. It's just a little bit different way. You're definitely still collecting payments on it. You may actually service it a little bit more because you're thinking about this vehicle as an asset on your books now. And you're definitely still repossessing the vehicle. It might be a little easier depending on what state you're in. Likely will be a lot easier, but you're still repossessing it. I think the way that you think about it is to have a different mindset. There's this marketing term called a red ocean and a blue ocean. And everybody wants to be in the blue ocean with your product or with your service because this blue ocean is wide open from competition. There's so much more geography you can cover, and the visibility is so much higher. The red ocean is called red because it's saturated with competition. It's fierce. There's blood in the water. It's getting darker and darker. We know that buy here, pay here receivables are about 80 billion right now. Lease here, pay here receivables are calculated about 3 billion and rising each year. Now, I know lease here, pay here is not exactly a blue ocean because it's not new. It's not completely innovative, but used car leasing in subprime and deep subprime is pretty innovative. It's pretty different. And there's a lot of competition you can sidestep with your program if you do it a little bit differently or if you think about it differently. So the car's your asset. You're repossessing your vehicle. The more you think about it as yours, the more this sort of program fits for you. The longer it runs, the more money it makes you, and you think about your customers differently. You think about your customer, how many times will this customer be mine? If you ever watch Shark Tank, you notice that those investors never, ever invest in the companies that say, we're going to sell somebody one thing, one time. They never want to do that. They want to know, what's the customer retention rate? How likely is it that I can sell this customer something over and over and over again? Yeah, that's all great, but there's some hurdles, right? If you've never done it before, there's going to be some hurdles that might hold you back from doing this. The first one, and this is real, is its access to capital. There's a handful of lenders compared to a lot on the lease here, pay here side. It seems like, and we experience this as a lender because we have financial partners who are coming to us now and interested in this, but it seems like as this is growing, that more lenders are going to be attracted to this area. There's also other ways to get it, especially if you're starting to bootstrap your organization. Maybe you start self-funding just your leases, or you borrow from friends and family just for your leases, or you go to your bank and say, you know what, I just need a credit line for $200,000 or $300,000 to get started. And then you can come to a lender that sees what you're doing and says, yeah, let's work together. I think we could be a good partner. The second, and this is really the big punch in the stomach, I think for most of our dealers who have converted over or who have offered it as part of their program, is does your DMS do leasing? Does your current DMS you're using do leasing? And what I want to do with that right now is just sort of table it. We'll put it on the table. I'll come back to it. But know that I want to address it. It's critical and important. But what we see, and we've seen this for years, the biggest hurdle, I don't know if you can see that, it's you and the fear of the unknown. Uncertainty is challenging. I had a dealer last week call me up who we've been talking with a while, really successful dealer, buy here, pay here, and he said, bro, I really want to do your program. I think I'm ready. I think my team's ready, but I'm old and I don't like change. And we laughed. And we laughed because there's a lot of truth in it. It's a real thing that we all, in many ways, don't like change because there's so much uncertainty. There's this sort of sales conversion model. It's pain plus pain relief plus ease of adoption equals the sale conversion. And if there's not enough pain and there's not a good solution for that and there's no way to get there, then it's really hard to take those steps. So here's one little incentive you might make you consider leasing. It's the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I think you were talking about that in the room next door just a talk ago. And I don't know if they covered this particular aspect because it has to do with used property. So they slipped in bonus depreciation on used property. Used vehicles apply to this right now, and this is the first time in 40 years that this has been available. You can depreciate up to 100% of your expense on that vehicle on the day that you incur that expense. Well, why would I want to do that? Well, you want to try to reduce your federal income tax liability to the best extent you can. And so the more depreciation that you can add onto your books, the lower that liability becomes in that period of time. There's a little quick draw. One of the CPA firms that sponsors this, Katz Sapper Miller, they came and we did a tutorial with them earlier in the year, and they talked us through all of this. We're not CPAs, but I encourage you to reach out to somebody like Katz Sapper Miller or one of the other firms that understands this, again, quick draw, this aspect of it, and can talk you through the benefits or disadvantages of how it'll work for your program, or how it could work for your program. So if you have some interest, what could you actually do to get started? What are the steps that you would take? Well, the first one, as you're standing at Starbucks waiting for your orange mocha frappuccino or your black coffee, depending on what you're going for, you can look up on your state website, what's the sales tax on leasing? Is it pay as you go? It'll take you 2 minutes to do. You can also look up Regulation M just by Googling it, and you'll get 3 or 4 paragraphs with a link to the entire regulation. Those paragraphs give you a pretty good idea up front of what it's about. The second, and I know I said I would get to this, we'll table it. We're just going to keep it on the table and keep going. So stay with me. What's my initial lease structure strategy going to be? I offered 3 to you. Which one is going to make you feel the most comfortable to start with initially? Could you benefit from a consultant? We're not consultants, we're lenders. We informally consult, but there are consultants available. There's dealers who have been doing this for 10 years and have 1,500 accounts and would gladly either just talk to you over the phone or come out to your shop for a day or two, train your staff, walk through any pitfalls you might have if you're really thinking about it. Capital, what should I do for my capital? Should I bootstrap it up front? Should I start a relationship with my lender now? Should I go full-blown lender, or start the relationship now, try a little bootstrapping, and develop into that? Okay, the DMS side. Can it currently print, calculate, and bill a lease? Can it track it accurately? This is important to do. Not every DMS, and I would say most DMSs, don't offer a leasing module, so it leaves you in a little bit of a pickle. There's a few that we've seen with our dealers that we feel comfortable endorsing. That doesn't mean that we've seen every DMS and that we can say there are no other DMSs that offer a leasing module than these 4. We were just talking to the Wayne Reeves guys out here. They have one. We want to see it just so we feel comfortable with it. And if you're a DMS provider out there and you have a leasing module, come find us. We want your name up on the list. We want to feel comfortable that what you're doing and the way that you're doing it is accurate. So DealPack, AutoMaster Systems, Auto Manager, and then Auto Finance Solutions. DealPack is probably the most tried and true, and Auto Finance Solutions is the newest to the market, but is probably the most sophisticated and up-to-date. Do I have to change my DMS, right? That's sort of that punch in the stomach. You just listed 4 and mine's not on there. Well, what do I do? I don't really know the answer to that, because I think that it's okay to go parallel. It depends on who your bean counters are in your operation, on if they can reconcile one platform with your accounting. If your DMS is sending everything to QuickBooks and you're going to add that in manually, that's not a big deal. If everything is coming out of your DMS and they don't have a way to manually input one of your streams of revenue, that might be a little more challenging. But I know AFS, Auto Finance Solutions, offers a program that allows you to go parallel with your DMS. If you're on Fraser and they say, look, we want to develop one, it may not be for a year or 2 or 3, but it's on our mind, then you have some way to do it. You can also do like a loan management system like AutoPal. They're not necessarily in this space. They're more in the subprime and regular lease and financing, but they do offer a leasing module. We've seen it. It's definitely good. We've had dealers use it and then transition over to one of the other ones when they're ready. Okay, here's what I want to end with before we get to some questions. We were at the NVLA conference earlier in the year, the National Vehicle Leasing Association. We had this really cool keynote speaker. He was an astronaut who had been in space for 6 months and came back down, and I don't know how we landed him, and it wasn't really a fit to leasing, but it was so cool to hear about what he was talking about. He was sharing pictures and stories, and he talked about the precise calculations that they need to have when they're launching the rocket up to zip around the Earth and fling them towards the space station that's moving at 18,000 miles an hour around the Earth, so that they can precisely engage and transfer. It's crazy. If one of those calculations was off, they can miss their target and zoom off out into space. And I think that's what we fear a lot when we're going to try something new. If I don't have the right business plan, if it's not all dialed in, then I'm going to be way off. My business is going to fall apart. Everything's going to come crashing down. I don't think that's what Lease Here, Pay Here programs or even your Buy Here, Pay Here program is like. It's a feedback loop. It's like getting in your car, adjusting your mirrors, turning it on, putting on your safety belt, hashtag LHPH Capital, beginning to navigate, and as you navigate, you're receiving information around you with your metrics, what's your average mile per hour, what's your average gas mileage, what are my safety metrics, and then you're taking that data and you're using it to learn. Your business is like a feedback loop. If you're not engaging your customers and getting feedback from them, you're not going to know if your program is going to be the right fit for them today or tomorrow or into the future. There's a guy by the name of Clayton Christensen. He's the author of Innovator's Dilemma, innovator's DNA, and he coined this term called voice of the customer. And what that is just engaging the customer to get feedback to put into your product or service loop so that you can get better. If you're thinking about doing a lease here, pay here program, it's kind of like you're going to stumble out of the gate. You're going to make mistakes. Our dealers who we work with now, if they look back, how was my program 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? It was vastly different because they were learning along the way. I think there's this fear of failure and fear of stumbling out of the gate, but those are the things that help us get better, that improve our programs. We almost want those things to happen so we can get better. And that doesn't go for just lease here, pay here. That goes for your buy here, pay here program or retail. You want to think about your business differently. It's interactive. Your business plan is changing and moving. So the question for this whole talk was, is lease here, pay here a better alternative? I think there's two parts to that. It could be a better alternative in your state, in your demographic. It might just be a really good addition. If you guys have any questions that you've jotted down along the way, I'd love to try to answer them. Yep.
So when you're figuring out the gross profit, is that basically just the sum of the payments you received during the plan?
The gross profit would be the sum of your payments, all the money's collected, minus out what you paid, the money that you put in the vehicle. So if you had to pay your lender, I didn't add any interest to that. But it wouldn't be, for that sort of a deal, it would be marginal.
So it's really a pure cash flow?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Come on, anybody else? I wasn't that thorough. Yes, you in the back.
Do you talk any mileage to the lease term?
You can. You definitely can. If it's a higher ACV vehicle, you probably should. You can add in, just like any new lease, you can add in over mileage, 10 cents per mile. You don't want to get too aggressive because then it'll be too high and you just won't get the money anyway. Yeah?
Your residual difference that you were talking about, the 20% versus 35 on the high.
Yeah.
Is that a set thing or just an example? Is it based, what's that based on?
Yeah, it's an example. So there's some different tools you can use. If you're going higher ACV models, you can use like a residual risk management program that can help you determine it. But really, one of the easiest ways is if you look at Black Book or MMR, and you take that same vehicle and look 3 years in the past and add in the mileage, you're going to get a pretty good idea of what that vehicle is going to be.
So is that set by us in our own model?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. You just want to keep a minimum of 20%. I think legally it's 10%, but there's this gray area between 10 and 20 that you could potentially be liable for it being a disguised sale. Anything above 20, good to go. Yeah.
You guys mentioned on the high-end model, if the payment would be enough to support your lending relationship.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, typically the payment stream that you're receiving from your customer, let's say on the higher ACV was $372. You're going to be paying your lender likely a monthly payment, so you'll have this payment spread. If it's a higher ACV, that payment spread is going to shrink down. Instead of it being 200 or 150, it might be 98 for that vehicle per month. And so what you have to determine is that going to be enough for me in the short term to get to those longer term benefits?
So, like on a $370 payment, you're saying $100 of that's going to go to the dealer, and $270 of that's going to go to the lender. But then at the end, you own the car outright, and $100 per month you get. So $3,600 after the lender's fee would be what you made at the end of the deal.
Right, before you put it out again.
Right, before you put it out.
Yep.
Now, on the mileage you said, that you could put in their mileage for a higher ACV car, would you take a deposit on that? You charge for that up front and then give it back to them if they don't go over the mileage? You gotta wait to try and collect that in?
Yeah, you can take a deposit up front, so that's cash. It shows up on your balance sheet as a liability, but it's still cash that you've received. And you can draw from that, just like as if you owned property and you were renting it out, you would collect a deposit of $1,000 or $1,500 for that. I know it's a little bit more on housing or apartment side, but you're going to take funds from that deposit and apply it towards wear and tear, mileage, the disposition fee. A disposition fee is when you turn in the vehicle. There's just a fee to turn it in because there's a transaction happening. Yeah, the way that that's defined is by 4 criteria. It's a gap principle, and they say here's these 4 measurements that will tell you if it's a capital lease. If it meets any of these 4 criteria, it's a capital lease. Most likely, if your residual is 20% or higher and it's a used car vehicle, it's likely going to be an operating lease. That's more beneficial on the tax and accounting side, and you don't have to have a related finance company if you're doing operating leasing versus capital leasing. Blue. Or, no, in Regulation M, there's no cap. I think just because we're serving a particular population of people, we don't want to be predators, so maybe you could go to 60%, but I don't know, would you feel good about it? So it's 25, 30, and I know one of our dealers, a couple of our dealers do a higher interest rate implicit in the lease, like 40, 45%, but they do a higher residual, and so all that's doing is they're creating a rent payment. That's it. Because they're renting the vehicle from you with a little bit longer term agreement than just being on a day-to-day basis.
What's the cost of money versus lease versus buy there as a zero lender?
Yeah.
What's the cost of money?
I think it ranges by lender. For us, our cost is prime plus 5 to plus 9. So plus 5 to plus 9. So 10.5 at this point, because it varies. Yeah, all the way up to 4.
And when you look at a lease, how do you value it? What percent do you actually finance of the lease?
What we do is we do it based off of the ACV. So we're going to finance you the cost of the vehicle, and we'll have an individual loan on that from, let's say it's $9,000, from $9,000 down to 0 at the same term as the lessee. That way they're in parallel together, and yeah. So we do it differently. Others do it on a borrowing base, and so it's a different way of looking at it.
If we repossess the car and we have the loan out with you guys on the car, the payments stop with you until we lease the car back out again, or we have to make the payments on it?
Some lenders require you to pay that principal balance off with the lender right away during repossession. What we do, and right or wrong, or best for you or not, is we stretch it out to 60 days. You have 60 days after you repossess the vehicle to put it back out, to put a new driver into it or to sell it at auction. And you just keep the payments with us. After the 60 days, if you can't do you can't do anything with the vehicle, then you need to pay it off with us.
Okay, so just freeze it for 60 days, and then you have to give us time to lease it back out?
Well, we don't freeze it on our end, so you would still be paying payments because we have an individual note. You're just paying it down over time. But you'll put in a new driver, so that way you're not refinancing that again. Again, yeah, because we want you to be able to pay that off soon, sooner than later. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
If I understand this correctly, we'd be the title owner to that car. If one of our customers was to go out and get a school bus, what kind of liability is that open us up to?
Actually, that's a really good transition. I added this as a supplemental slide. So what you're talking about is vicarious liability. You, as the dealer, are the owner of the vehicle. That means your name is on the title. Your driver, the lessee, their name is on the title as the lessee, and your lender would likely be the first lien holder. As the owner, in 2005, I believe, this was signed into law by George W. Bush, and what it means is for rental companies and lease fleet companies is that there's a line of liability where if your lessee drives your car into a school bus of kids, that it doesn't get to you as the dealer or us as the lender. It stops at the driver because it was their mistake. Yeah.
Gap insurance. You sell gap insurance, do you have to include it on each contract?
You can. We don't require it. Maybe some other lenders do. Some dealers force place CPI if they spot check and there's no insurance. You guys want to see that? No. We'll go back to the resources page. One other thing I wanted to mention. NIADA has a 20 group that's run by Mark Dubois. He's sitting right here. Would you raise your hand, Mark? If you want to, he's super knowledgeable on it. If you want to connect with him or connect with other dealers who are doing it, he's a good resource for that, or you can come to us and we'll connect you to somebody who's doing it. You don't have to take our word for it. We'll likely take guys who are interested in us and say, hey, connect with this dealer. They work with us. They'll tell you, the good and the bad when we're not around. Any other questions before you guys go eat lunch? All right, I'm happy to stay around. Yeah.
Do leases have a tendency to take better care of the car than a person?
I think it's hit and miss. So, yes, for the customer who's really excited about that car and cares about it, there's always going to be a customer population that just can't take care of a car no matter if it's good or bad. But well, if they know that, that's why the deposit is kind of a good incentive. If you want some of that deposit back, or you don't want to owe extra money on wear and tear and mileage, then it's in your best interest to pay for or to take care of the vehicle. Yeah, it's just a conversation. All right. Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate it.